So let's start in the year 1878.
Right. Okay.
There's this entomologist, right, and an archaeologist, a guy named Hjalmar Stolpe, and he's digging on the Swedish island of Birka.
Yeah, at the site known as Birka, which was just this massive Viking Age trading center.
Exactly. And during this excavation, he finds a grave. It's designated BJ 581.
Right.
And what he found in this specific grave basically became the textbook definition of a Viking warlord for like the next 130 years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the grave goods were just staggering.
Yeah.
Yeah, they found the skeleton buried with a sword, an axe, a spear.
Wow.
Yeah, and armor-piercing arrows, a battle knife, 2 shields, and even 2 sacrifice horses.
That is just an insane amount of hardware for one person.
It really is. And they also found this full set of gaming pieces.
Oh, like board game pieces.
Yeah, exactly. Which in Norse burials, that strongly indicates a person who planned military strategy. You know, like a commander.
Right, someone who sees the whole battlefield.
Yeah, exactly. So naturally, every single historian and archaeologist who looked at this grave for the next century, they all drew the exact same conclusion.
That this was a male Viking chieftain.
Yep. A high-status, legendary male warlord. I mean, the assumption was so deeply baked into the historical consensus that it wasn't even considered a theory, you know? It was just treated as a pure observational fact.
Right, because of course the guy with the sword in the strategy game is a man. That was just the default.
Exactly. That is until 2017.
When the science finally caught up.
Yes. Modern science finally caught up with 19th century archaeology. Researchers did this comprehensive genomic study on the bones from BJ 581.
And the results were pretty shocking, right?
Yeah, completely paradigm shifting. The DNA analysis proved definitively that this heavily armed, high-status military commander was biologically female.
Which is just incredible. A full century of academic textbooks instantly rendered obsolete by like a single DNA swab.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are working through a really fascinating stack of source material today that provides a comprehensive historical examination of early Norse and Viking society.
And it's a society that is so often misunderstood.
So misunderstood. So the mission for our deep dive today, for you listening, is to take that cartoonish, two-dimensional berserker stereotype, you know, the guys with the horn helmets and the pure bloodlust.
Which, by the way, the horn helmets are a total myth.
Right. We're going to take all of that and completely dismantle it, and we're replacing it with the factual, complex reality of a civilization that somehow managed to balance, like, a remarkable democratic legal system with a brutal, globe-spanning human trafficking network.
Yeah, to really understand this civilization, we first have to recognize that the term Viking itself is, well, it's kind of a trap.
How so?
Because it wasn't an ethnic identity, it was a job description.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to go a Viking meant to go raiding or trading. The vast majority of the people we are discussing today, they were just Norse farmers, traders, lawmakers, people who stayed home.
Okay, that makes sense.
And to truly grasp their world, we really have to clear away the historical narratives that were written by their victims.
Right, because the victim narrative bias here is just massive. If you think about who was actually writing down the history of Northern Europe in the 8th and 9th centuries, it was the literate clerics.
Exactly. The monks of Christian Europe.
And these are the exact people whose coastal monasteries were constantly being targeted for their silver.
Right. I mean, think about it. If your only interaction with a foreign society is when their absolute most violent young men show up on your shores.
Yeah, just jumping off boats with axes.
To sack your monastery, capture your congregation, and steal your wealth, your historical record is going to reflect pure trauma.
Obviously. You're not going to sit down and write a nuanced treatise on their sophisticated domestic legal procedures back home.
No, of course not. You write that they are literal demons sent by God to punish you for your sins.
Which completely obscures the highly sophisticated political engine operating back home in Scandinavia, and especially in Iceland.
Oh, absolutely.
I actually want to ground this by looking at a specific geographical location, the source's detail. The Althing in Iceland.
The Althing is such a perfect example.
Yeah, so picture this. It's late June, around the year 930 A.D. Thousands of people are converging on this place called Thingvellir. And this isn't like a castle or a throne room. It's this open-air valley situated right on the mid-Atlantic tectonic rift.
The logistics of just gathering there are incredible. You have chieftains, ordinary farmers, merchants, entire families, and they're traveling across glacial rivers and this unforgiving volcanic terrain for weeks
Just to attend this meeting.
just to attend. And they set up these temporary camps, they called them booths, across the whole valley. But the crazy part is they haven't come to bow to a monarch. Iceland at this time had no king.
Right.
They gathered around this specific geographical feature called the Logberg, or the Law Rock, simply to govern themselves.
It's essentially a Supreme Court, a legislative parliament, and a massive national festival all rolled into one.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
They're settling disputes, they're forging laws by public argument and assembly. And for us, it requires holding two completely opposing concepts in our minds at once.
What do you mean?
Like on one hand, we have the raider with the bloodied axe in England. And on the other hand, we have the democratic citizen arguing procedural contract law in an Icelandic valley. It's like finding out that a notoriously violent local biker gang actually runs a highly sophisticated democratic constitutional law firm on the weekends.
That's actually a pretty solid analogy.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to merge those two images, we have to look at the structural foundation of their society.
Right.
We have to understand that while they had this very early democratic impulse, we really cannot mistake this for some modern egalitarian utopia.
Not at all.
No. To understand who actually had the right to speak at that law rock, we have to examine how the Norse legally and conceptually divided their world. And the sources outline three very stark, rigid classes.
Right, so let's break those down. At the absolute bottom were the thralls, right? The enslaved class. Yes, the thralls.
Then in the vast middle were the jarls. These were the free farmers, the craftsmen, the landowners.
The backbone of the society, really.
Right. And then at the top were the jarls, the aristocracy, the wealthy chieftains. But what really stands out in the source text is how they justified this hierarchy.
Oh, the justification is fascinating.
Yeah, because they didn't just rely on the threat of violence to keep people in line. They literally baked the class division into their spiritual framework.
Right, through a piece of mythology known as the Rigsula.
The lay of Rig.
Exactly. And the Rigsula is just a masterclass in divine social engineering.
Okay, walk us through it. What's the story?
So Rig is actually the god Heimdall, the watchman of the gods. And he's traveling in disguise through the world of humans. And according to the poem, he visits 3 different households. He shares their food. He sleeps between the husband and wife in each home.
Which is quite a detail.
Very intimate, yeah. And consequently, he fathers the 3 classes of human society.
And the physical descriptions of these children in the poem are wildly unsparing.
Oh, they're brutal.
Yeah. So when Rig visits the first house, it's this miserable, rundown shack. And the child born from that encounter is the first thrall.
Right.
And the poem describes this infant as, like, dark-haired, with rough skin, a bent back, and thick, gnarled fingers.
It's very explicitly painting a picture of someone built for labor.
Exactly. The myth literally states this child was designed for hauling heavy timber, shoveling dirt, and tending pigs.
It is the ultimate rationalization for exploitation. I mean, the slave-owning class is essentially constructing a narrative where the people they enslave are biologically and divinely destined for hard labor.
It totally absolves the enslaver of any moral guilt.
Precisely. They can just say, well, the brutal treatment of the thralls is simply the natural order established by the gods. It's not my fault, it's just how the universe works.
Man, that is dark. So then Rig moves on to a second house.
Right, the second visit.
And this one is a sturdy, well-kept farm. It's got a loom and tools, and the child born here is the first Carl.
The free man.
Right. And he's described as having red hair, a ruddy complexion, piercing eyes. He grows up to tame oxen, build barns, forge tools. He is the idealized free man.
And crucially, the Jarls are the class associated with bearing arms.
Which is a huge deal in this culture.
It's the defining legal metric of the Norse world.
Yeah.
A weapon was not merely a tool for violence, It was the physical manifestation of freedom.
Right, like a badge.
Exactly. If you were a Jarl, wearing your sword or your axe on your belt was a very public declaration that you were an independent citizen. It meant you actually had the right to attend the thing, to vote, and to seek legal restitution. The Jarls were undeniably the economic and cultural engine of the society.
Okay, so then we get to the third visit. Finally, Rig visits this massive, wealthy hall. They're serving him roasted meat and wine, not just, basic farm food.
High status.
And the child born here is the first jarl. The poem says this child is fair-haired, bright with eyes as fierce as a young serpent's. And Rig himself actually returns to this specific child later on, teaches him the magic of runes, and instructs him in the art of war and leadership.
And the linguistic through line here is really fascinating because the Old Norse word jarl directly evolved into the English aristocratic title earl.
Oh, wow. Never put that together.
Yeah, these were the warlords who commanded the longships and controlled vast estates. And this myth, it essentially serves as a warning to the lower classes. Do not challenge the jarls because their authority comes directly from the divine transmission of knowledge. Rig taught them magic and war, not you.
I mean, I find myself struggling to accept that this worked universally.
What do you mean?
Well, this myth is just incredibly convenient for the people at the top. It reads like propaganda drafted by the winners. Are we really supposed to believe that a society of heavily armed, notoriously independent free farmers just quietly accepted a poem telling them they were genetically inferior to the guy living in the big hall? Was anyone actually buying this, or was it just a fairy tale to keep the workers in line?
That's a really fair pushback, but we have to differentiate between modern political propaganda and ancient religious frameworks. It wasn't that a jarl stood on a stump one day and dictated this poem to subjugate the masses.
That was more organic.
Yeah, it was a shared oral tradition that evolved organically over time to reflect the society as it already existed. But your skepticism is justified because the Norse system was not some rigid, inescapable feudal caste system.
Right.
The boundary lines between these three classes were actually surprisingly porous.
And the mechanism for that mobility seems entirely tied to the chaos of the Viking Age itself.
Precisely. Chaos is the ultimate ladder. The expansion of the Norse into global trade and raiding created these unprecedented avenues for socioeconomic advancement.
So you could jump classes.
Absolutely. Think about an ambitious Jarl. If he joined a raiding expedition, survived a few seasons fighting in the Mediterranean or trading down in the Byzantine Empire, and returned home with a massive hoard of silver dirhams, he could fundamentally alter his status.
Because he suddenly has the capital.
Right. He could purchase vast tracts of land, attract his own followers, and essentially finance his way to the Jarl class.
So martial prowess acted as an engine for rapid social mobility.
Yes. And even at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy, a thrall could occasionally be granted freedom or even buy their freedom through side labor.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they would become what's known as a leisingi, or freedman. Now, it took generations to fully wash away the legal stigma of enslavement. A freedman still owed certain obligations to their former owner, but the door was not welded shut. There was a path upward.
But that mobility required the men to leave. When tens of thousands of weapon-bearing carls and jarls get into longships and sail to England or Francia or the rivers of Eastern Europe for months or years at a time, it creates a massive vacuum of authority and labor back home in Scandinavia.
It does, which forces us to look at the domestic economy and, honestly, the radical legal reality of Norse women.
And we need to caveat this immediately, right?
Yeah.
The society was deeply patriarchal. Men held the formal political power. They were the ones debating at the Law Rock. They were the chieftains.
Absolutely, it was patriarchal.
Well,
But within that structure, the sources reveal women holding a level of economic autonomy that completely defies the medieval European standard. I mean, most European women wouldn't see rights like this for another 1,000 years.
right. Norse women possessed explicit property rights. They could own land in their own name. They could manage inheritances. They could conduct trade.
Yeah. And when a marriage was arranged, it involved these very complex financial transfers. The woman's family provided a dowry, of course, but the groom also provided a mourning gift.
The linfey, right.
Yes, the linfey, which was paid directly to the bride the morning after the wedding to ensure her personal financial independence. And that wealth remained legally hers.
This translates into staggering logistical authority. Because with the men gone on these long expeditions, the women were not just passively waiting by the hearth.
Far from it.
They were the acting executives of massive agricultural and industrial estates. They dictated the planting, they managed the livestock, they oversaw the thralls, and they made the absolute ultimate survival decisions for the community during those really harsh winters.
And the sources highlight a very specific, potent symbol of this authority.
The keys.
Yes, the keys.
Right.
The mistress of the household wore the keys to the farm's storehouses, the chests, the strong boxes, and she wore them openly on her belt.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's such a brilliant visual mechanism. I sort of compare it to a modern CEO wearing their security badge.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
You aren't just wearing jewelry. You are wearing a loud declaration of supreme operational authority. If you hold the keys, you control the caloric distribution of the entire estate. You literally control who eats and who starves.
Exactly. And this economic power naturally extended into their legal rights regarding marriage. A Norse woman had the right to initiate a divorce.
Which is wild for that time period.
It really is. And she did not require the permission of a religious authority or a monarch to do so.
And the mechanics of how they executed a divorce are fascinating because of how incredibly pragmatic they are. The sources indicate a woman could divorce her husband for physical abuse, for failing to provide for the household, or even if he was unable to fulfill his marital duties.
Yes.
There's even a provision stating she could divorce him if he wore clothing considered too effeminate, like shirts with overly plunging necklines.
I love that detail. That specific law regarding clothing really underscores how fiercely the Norse policed gender norms and public honor. A man failing to perform his gender role was seen as a literal breach of the marital contract.
So walk me through the actual mechanism of a divorce. In a society with zero courthouses, no police, how does a woman legally dissolve a marriage and divide a massive farming estate?
The procedure relied entirely on public declaration and witness testimony. The woman had to declare her intention to divorce before witnesses in very specific geographical locations,
Where?
first at the couple's bedside and then again at the threshold of the home. Once that declaration was witnessed in both places, the marriage was legally void.
Just like that. And
Right.
what happens to the assets?
She took her dowry and her mourning gift with her, and if the divorce was initiated because of the husband's failures or transgressions, like the plunging neckline, she might even be entitled to a larger share of the shared estate. She didn't walk away destitute. She walked away as an independent, wealthy woman capable of remarrying on her own terms.
Which brings us right back to the Birka grave and the shield-maidens. We have this society that grants women property rights, divorce rights, and supreme control over the domestic economy. Does that cultural flexibility explain why they could conceive of a female military commander, whereas Victorian archaeologists completely fail to?
Undoubtedly. The rigid Victorian gender binaries simply did not map onto the Norse reality. And we have other archaeological evidence, too, like the Oseberg ship burial in Norway.
Oh, right.
This was one of the most lavish ship burials ever discovered. It contained incredibly carved animal heads, tapestries, and this massive longship. And the two individuals buried inside with all this unimaginable wealth and status were both women.
The pushback against the Birka DNA results was intense, though. The moment the genomic study proved the commander was a woman, suddenly scholars started questioning the grave goods. Oh, maybe the weapons were just symbolic, or maybe they belonged to a male relative.
Right.
They never asked those questions for 130 years when they thought the skeleton was male.
The double standard in historical interpretation is glaring. Now, we shouldn't necessarily imagine entire battalions of shield-maidens forming shield walls at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that women could and did ascend to the highest echelons of status. And in some contexts, that included martial and strategic roles.
So we have a fiercely independent class of Carls and women with robust, actionable legal rights. But here is the massive structural problem. There is no executive branch.
None.
The Norse had absolutely no standing police force, no state troopers, no public prosecutors. How do you enforce a property right or a divorce settlement or a contract without a state apparatus that holds a monopoly on violence?
That's the million-dollar question. When there is no central authority to enforce the law, enforcement is privatized. It falls entirely to the injured party and their extended kinship network.
So if someone steals your livestock or injures your cousin,
It is incumbent upon you to extract justice.
which leads directly to the blood feud. If my family attacks your family to get our stolen sheep back, your family is now honor-bound to retaliate to restore your public reputation.
Exactly. And the blood feud was the existential threat of the Norse world. Without a mechanism to halt the violence, families would lock into these multi-generational cycles of retaliation that could literally depopulate entire regions.
It's just endless revenge.
Right. So to prevent their society from completely tearing itself apart, they developed the legal mechanism of weregild, which translates to man price.
This is an incredibly elaborate machine designed to channel violence into commerce. Explain the mechanics of a weregild negotiation. How exactly do you put a price tag on a human life?
So the legal code contained this highly specific matrix, often called the ring list or bogatal, that assigned a silver value to almost every conceivable injury and to life itself. And it was strictly stratified by class.
Right, going back to the Rigsula.
Exactly. A jarl's life demanded a massive silver payment. A carl's life was less. A thrall was treated as damaged property, so the compensation just went directly to the owner. Furthermore, the code broke down injuries with granular precision.
Like what?
Like, the loss of an eye had a specific price, the severing of a thumb. A scar on the face that was visible in public had a different price than a hidden scar under your clothes.
So if a dispute arises, instead of my family burning down your farm, we take the issue to the thing. We present our cases before the assembly.
And the judges or chieftains decreed the weregild owed. But the brilliance and the complexity of weregild is that the payment wasn't just individual, it was collective.
How so?
If you are ordered to pay a massive weregild, your extended family, like your paternal and maternal cousins, were legally obligated to contribute to the payment. And on the flip side, the receiving family divided the silver among their relatives based on their degree of kinship to the victim.
It effectively turned the entire extended family into a mutual insurance company.
That's exactly what it was.
Your relatives had a vested financial interest in keeping you out of trouble because if you went and killed someone, they were going to have to foot part of the bill.
It distributed the pressure and strongly incentivized families to police their own members.
But to manage this staggeringly complex legal matrix in a largely non-literate society, I mean, they didn't have massive leather-bound legal encyclopedias.
No, they didn't. They relied on a specific elected official called the law speaker, or logzugumalur, and the law speaker had to literally memorize the entire legal code.
I think of the law speaker as a living, breathing hard drive, or like a human blockchain.
A human blockchain.
Yeah. In a modern blockchain, a transaction is validated because
Yeah.
it's recorded on a public ledger that everyone can see. In the Norse world, the law was validated by the consensus of thousands of free citizens hearing it spoken aloud.
Oh, I see.
You couldn't have a corrupt elite secretly rewrite a clause in a hidden Latin manuscript because every single carl in the valley heard the law speaker recite the actual law last summer.
That's a great point. In Iceland, the law speaker was elected for a 3-year term. His primary duty was to stand at the law rock at the Althing and recite 1/3 of the complete legal code aloud from memory each year. So over his term, the entire body of law was spoken into the public record.
It totally democratizes the legal framework. But a legal framework is only as good as its ultimate penalty.
Right.
Because they lacked prisons, they had to devise a punishment for those who committed crimes so heinous they could not be resolved with weregild, or for those who simply refused to pay their fines.
And that brings us to outlawry.
And we need to be really clear here that this isn't the romanticized Robin Hood version of an outlaw.
Far from it. Outlawry was social death. The Norse had 2 tiers. Lesser outlawry, which is a 3-year exile, and full outlawry, known as skogangr, or going into the forest.
Skogangr.
Yeah. If the thing declared you a full outlaw, you were stripped of all civil rights, your property was immediately confiscated, you were banished from society.
And the most terrifying mechanical aspect of this, you were placed entirely outside the protection of the law. I mean, it's like modern cancel culture.
Yeah.
But taken to a literal, lethal extreme, where you become absolute prey.
Yes. Anyone could legally murder you. If someone kills an outlaw, they owed no weregild, and they faced no retaliation.
Wow.
In the freezing, unforgiving geography of Scandinavia or Iceland, being cast out of the social safety net and hunted by your own neighbors was a death sentence. For a culture so obsessed with reputation and community standing, outlawry was a fate worse than physical death. It was complete erasure.
Okay, so this entire brilliant mechanism of justice, the thing, the weregild, the avoidance of the blood feud, it relies on one fundamental resource.
Silver?
Right. To participate in this system, to pay the massive fines required to maintain your honor and avoid becoming an outlaw, you need an immense amount of liquid wealth. You need silver.
Which forces us to confront the absolute darkest economic engine of the Viking Age. The massive influx of silver required to fuel their domestic democracy and legal systems did not come from farming rocky Scandinavian soil. It came from a global, systemic, and brutally efficient slave trade.
The sources require us to look squarely at this. We usually picture Viking raids as, smash and grab robberies of church gold. And they were.
I definitely were.
But the primary economic driver of the Viking expansion was human trafficking.
The Norse operated a slave network of staggering proportions. If you look at the Scandinavian expansion eastward, primarily by the Swedish Vikings known as the Rus,
The Rose, right.
They navigated the massive river systems of Eastern Europe, the Dnieper and the Volga, and they weren't just exploring, they were actively capturing the local populations and funneling them south to the incredibly wealthy markets of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople and the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad.
And they were trading people for silver dirhams.
Exactly.
The sheer volume of this trafficking permanently altered the European vocabulary.
The linguistic legacy is incredibly grim. The people living in Eastern Europe were so heavily targeted and trafficked by the Rus that their ethnonym, the Slavs, became the root for the word slave in English, French, Spanish, and Arabic.
That is just awful.
The very concept of human bondage in Europe was renamed after the victims of the Norse trade.
And we use another word constantly, thrall. When we say someone is enthralled by a movie or enthralled to a political ideology, we are directly referencing the lowest enslaved caste of Norse society. Our everyday language carries the ghost of their human trafficking.
It really does. And looking west, the expansion into the British Isles was equally driven by slavery.
Like in Ireland.
Yeah, the city of Dublin, which was founded by the Norse, was explicitly built up into one of the largest slave trading ports in Western Europe. They launched raids into the Irish interior, into Scotland and England, capturing tens of thousands of people, processing them in Dublin, and selling them across the ocean.
So how should we modern people process this? Can we still admire the democracy of the all thing or the empowerment of the shield-maidens, knowing it was entirely subsidized by human trafficking?
It is the great paradox of their history. The brutality wasn't even limited to the point of capture or the forced labor. The archaeological evidence regarding how the thralls were treated in death reveals the complete commodification of human life.
You're talking about the grave goods.
Yes. When a wealthy Norse jarl or chieftain died, they needed to be accompanied by their wealth into the afterlife. In multiple excavated graves, archaeologists have found the remains of enslaved people who were decapitated or strangled and thrown into the burial mound simply to serve their master in the next world.
Just murdered to be buried alongside them?
Exactly. They were treated no differently than a sacrificed horse or a broken shield. They were disposable property.
I want to synthesize this because it's so jarring. The sources demand that we respect the intellectual rigor of the all thing, the empowerment of the women, and the memory of the law speaker. But we have to simultaneously acknowledge that the silver fueling that democracy and the agricultural labor freeing up the men to go debate the law was provided entirely by enslaved humans.
History rarely offers us morally pure subjects. We can marvel at their innovations in procedural justice while maintaining absolute clarity about the horrific human cost of their economy. The Norse viewed human life through a deeply pragmatic, almost mathematical lens.
And that harsh valuation didn't just apply to conquered strangers, did it? It dictated how they treated their own families.
Oh, absolutely. That pragmatism shapes the entire arc of a Norse life, from cradle to grave.
Let's look at how they constructed a family then. Because they lived in an environment with razor-thin margins for survival, marriage was basically stripped of modern romantic sentimentality.
Completely. Marriage was a socioeconomic merger. It was a calculated alliance designed to pool resources, secure land rights, and create a broader network of kin to support each other during blood feuds or famines.
Right, because if you get sued for weregild, you need wealthy in-laws to help pay the fine.
Exactly. The negotiations over the dowry and the bride price were intense, legalistic affairs. Romance was entirely secondary to survival.
And that exact same harsh arithmetic dictated the beginning of life. The sources detail the custom of infant exposure, which is, it's incredibly difficult for a modern audience to process.
It is. When a child was born, it was not inherently considered a person with a right to live.
Wait, really?
Yes. The newborn was placed on the floor. The father, or the head of the household, had to formally inspect the child.
Okay.
If he chose to accept it, he would lift the infant onto his knee and sprinkle it with water in a naming ceremony. Only then did the child possess legal rights and the protection of the family.
And the mechanism for rejection.
Yeah.
Like if the child had a visible deformity, or perhaps even more commonly, if the family had endured a terrible harvest and simply lacked the caloric surplus to feed another mouth through a 6-month winter.
If that happened, the child would be rejected. It would be physically taken outside the bounds of the farm and left exposed to the elements to die.
Just left outside in the snow.
Yes. It is a horrific reality, but it underscores a society living so close to the edge of starvation that sentimentality was viewed as an existential threat to the rest of the household. If you couldn't feed everyone, you had to make a brutal choice.
But if a child was accepted, they didn't exactly get to enjoy a protected, leisurely childhood either.
No, the concept of adolescence didn't exist. By the age of 12 or 13, Norse youths were legally and socially considered adults.
12 or 13.
Yeah. They were expected to perform heavy agricultural labor, enter into marriages, and participate in the defense of the community.
So what does this all mean? All of this labor and life centered around the architecture of the longhouse. During the winter, the core family, the extended laborers, the thralls, and the livestock, all sheltered under a single massive roof just to share body heat.
Right, communal living at its most extreme.
And inside that longhouse, the women were engaged in an industrial-scale manufacturing effort that we rarely associate with Viking conquests.
You're talking about textile production.
Yes, the sources indicate that the backbone of Norse naval supremacy wasn't just shipbuilding, it was weaving.
It's incredible. To power a Viking longship, you obviously need a sail. And a standard square sail for a longship could measure over 100 square meters. These were woven entirely from wool on upright warp-weighted looms.
Walk me through the mechanics of that labor, because the math on this is staggering.
First, you have to breed and raise a specific type of sheep, like the Icelandic sheep, which has a dual coat. It has coarse outer hair for water resistance and soft inner wool for insulation. The women had to shear the sheep, manually sort the fibers, clean it, and spin every single strand of thread by hand using a drop spindle.
Every strand.
Every single strand. Once the thread was spun, they had to weave it. The cloth, known as vamal, was so vital it actually functioned as the standard currency in Iceland.
They paid for things with cloth.
Exactly. And experimental archaeologists have calculated that spinning and weaving a single long ship sail required more hours of labor than chopping the timber and building the ship itself.
That's crazy.
It could take 2 to 3 years of continuous female labor to produce one sail.
Think about the societal investment that represents. I compare it to a family spending a decade building a spacecraft by hand in their living room. When we picture a fleet of 20 Viking ships appearing off the coast of England, we shouldn't just see a warband. We're looking at the culmination of tens of thousands of hours of domestic labor.
Oh, without a doubt.
Every ship represents the immense wealth, the sacrificed time, and the collective industrial output of an entire community of women.
The men sailed the ships, but the women built the engine that allowed them to leave the fjord in the first place.
And the psychological framework driving both the men in the boats and the women at the loom was incredibly specific. They shared a worldview steeped in absolute fatalism.
Fatalism was the bedrock of Norse theology. They believed in the Norns' 3 female entities named Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, and they represented the past, present, and future.
Right.
The Norns sat at the base of the world tree and physically wove the tapestry of human fate.
Meaning the exact moment and manner of your death was predetermined before you were even born. You literally cannot dodge your fate.
Exactly. And if you cannot change when you will die, what is left for you to control? You can only control your reaction to your fate. You control your courage, your loyalty, your adherence to your oaths, and the ferocity with which you face the inevitable.
It totally strips away the fear of the unknown. Like, if the Norns have decided you aren't going to die today, you can sail into a hurricane with impunity, and if they have decided you are going to die today, well, staying home, hiding under the bed won't save you.
No, it won't.
So you might as well die with a sword in your hand.
All that matters, the only thing that actually survives the grave is your reputation. The Havamal, which is a collection of Old Norse poems, explicitly states that cattle die, kinsmen die, and you yourself will die. But the one thing that never dies is the judgment on a dead man.
They were just obsessed with legacy.
They really were. They endured this freezing, brutal existence just to leave a story behind that their descendants would recite at the thing.
Which brings us to the end of our journey through the source material. Let's pull all these threads together. We started with a flat, simplistic image of a barbarian raider, but we have uncovered a deeply complex, incredibly pragmatic civilization.
We found an ecosystem of free jarls fiercely defending their legal independence. We found women managing vast agricultural estates, demanding divorces, and perhaps even commanding armies. We found a society that gathered in open valleys to validate their laws through public memory and debate.
But we also found a society fueled by human trafficking, a people who built their democracy and their wealth on the broken backs of an enslaved class they treated as disposable machinery. We see an environment so unforgiving that a father could casually condemn his own infant to death in the snow.
History doesn't provide us with clean narratives or unblemished heroes. It provides us with human beings who are capable of the most profound intellectual innovations and the most horrific cruelties, often at the exact same time.
Understanding the Norse forces you to look at the blind spots in our modern world. They built a society that genuinely championed legal rights and equality among its free citizens while remaining utterly blind to the moral horror of their slave economy. It was completely normalized to them.
Which leaves us with a necessary, if uncomfortable, question about our own era.
Exactly. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If the Norse could build a society that genuinely championed legal rights and equality among its free citizens while remaining utterly blind to the moral horror of their slave economy, what foundational practices of our modern, everyday economy will future historians look back on with that exact same mixture of awe and absolute disgust?
That is a vital question for anyone studying the past.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the past, keep digging into the sources, and remember that the moment you think history is simple, you're missing the most fascinating parts of the story. Until next time.